It's the Misfits.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Ministry Misfits. Andrew and I are still in studio. We're having some technical difficulties potentially.
Yeah,
Some stomach sounds happening that might come
stomach
through.
difficulties is you.
That's right, and the Dairy Queen ice cream.
And Dairy Queen. The technical difficulties, we don't know what is going on. For some reason, only Brandon is getting internet in my house.
Not paying for it.
Not paying for it. So we'll see how this goes.
It's like I'm one of your kids.
There we go. So, yeah, we are in studio, at least for this week. We'll see how next week goes with it being July 4th and the fact that we forgot that next week was July 4th. Which the other side of that...
It really snuck up on me.
It did. The other sad part of that means that birthday month is coming to a close.
That is true. Yeah, as you're listening to this episode, birthday month has ended.
No, it shouldn't be, because this should be coming out on Tuesday, which is not July 1st.
Yes, okay.
So you should hopefully be listening to this and it still be birthday month. So if it's not July, if June is still on your calendar, if you go to Patreon, go to the birthday tab on the Misfits site to get the Cash App link, all that good stuff. If you are able to join into birthday month, you've got a very short window to do it. So go do that. Come celebrate birthday month. Next week though, July, we may or may not have an episode because we forgot it was July 4th. So you know how that goes. We are really bad with the calendar in 2023 so far.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this whole year is flying by. And when somebody this last weekend was like, "Oh, are you coming over next weekend for 4th of July?" And I was like, "Wait, that is next weekend already." So I feel like, yeah, this whole year.
Yeah. So we don't know what's going to happen next week, but for this week we're in studio, and this week we are going to finally have a conversation that we've talked about. The fact that we started in a Bible study like a year and a half ago and never finished, and that we keep mentioning, oh yeah, we were going to talk about this, maybe we'll do this someday. Well, today's the day. So we're going to talk about part of a discussion.
Yes, not all of it,
because there's no way to do one episode on this topic. We're going to come back to it occasionally here and there, but we're going to start the conversation today on worship, and specifically what it is and what it actually looks like. And then we'll jump on the rabbit trails later on. We've got a couple guests we want to bring in to do that. We kind of started the worship topic pre-Brandon. Mm-hmm. Going back with Jason Hunley with the Worship Leaders Weekly podcast and talking about how he goes about the idea of psalm choice and what it looks like as far as leading worship. We kind of talked about it with David Waddell in his book, Worship Wars. But that is not the area we're going into today. Today, we're actually going into what it is.
Yeah, and I think we've hinted potentially in the past of like, oh, maybe we'll explore worship versus praise. We're just going to specifically...
Right. That conversation, we're going to get to another time. Today, though, we're just going to get on the worship side. And we're going to hint at a couple of other topics that'll come up eventually within this because it's inevitable. So, we're going to start just by defining it. Webster's gives us two definitions. To honor or show reverence for as a divine being or spiritual power. So, specifically honoring or reverencing a divine being. Mm-hmm. That, I actually think, is a horrible definition for worship, and we'll get to why that is here in a minute. The second one, I think, is a better one, and it's to regard with great or extravagant respect, honor, or devotion.
Yeah, I like that second one a little bit more because I think it also provides what I'll call a worldly definition of worship.
I wouldn't even necessarily a worldly definition. It provides a definition that allows for idolatry.
Yes, that's the better way of saying what I was
because a worldly definition of worship typically is what number one is. It's only towards divine beings or supernatural powers. even when they are talking about the idea of they are worshiping even athletes, when they start using the word, we worship this guy, normally it's because they literally are saying he's basically a divine being.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not just that. It's to regard with great respect, honor, or devotion specifically.
Yeah, that's the key word.
Is the big one. That is what we are talking about when we talk about worship in English. It gets even more narrowed down as we walk through a biblical view of what worship is. So in the Old Testament, there's like 5 or 6 different words that all technically mean worship and get translated to worship. The one we care about today is the one that we see in Exodus 20, which Exodus 20 is what, Brandon?
Is that the 10 Commandments?
10 Commandments. Ding, the soundboard's down, so I can't actually give you the thing. So, yeah, Exodus 20 is 10 Commandments. And the first commandment is,
thou shalt not create any other gods before me.
that's number 2. No creating gods is number 2. Number 1 is no gods before me. And specifically, it's you will not worship or serve other gods. The word that is used for the worship side of it is shakah, which literally means to bow down. So you will not bow down to anybody but me, is what commandment number 1 is. No other gods before me means you're not bowing down to anybody before you bow down to me. In the New Testament, we've got a bunch of other words also, but specifically there's 2 that we care about. The actual action of worship is sibo, which when I say that, there's a lot of people that are suddenly going to realize they actually knew that, because this is one of the things that you always hear at least once a year from a typical evangelical worship leader is they use the Greek word for worship. And people have no idea why they know it, but they do.
It's not ringing a bell to me, so I'm curious, is there a certain season that it's
I don't know what season it
typically
is,
talked about?
but I've heard it from just about every worship leader that I've ever interacted with mentions this at least one time.
They just want to sprinkle it in.
And it literally just means to worship. But it doesn't give us anything other than that it means to worship. So we're defining the word with the word again. But the other word is proskuneo, which is what we already talked about with Webster's of to do reverence to show devotion to. But if you actually break the word up, we start to get a better idea of what we're talking about. Because the actual word is literally to kiss the ground in the direction of the person that it's being directed to. So you are showing reverence by kissing the ground in front of the person. Lips to the ground, bowing down. That's a little bit more than just respect and honor.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's everything you walk on and touch.
Everything
I worship.
Yes. And that is what the biblical lens of worship, both Old Testament and New Testament, all involve a bowing down. Specifically when we talk about worship. It is a humble devotion. Not just say, "Oh, this guy's really cool. Let's all follow after him." It is a humble devotion of bowing down and kissing the ground before them. When we talk idolatry, it's the same sort of idea within the Greek of it's a bowing down before.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just showing honor or reverence because somebody's divine. It is a full-on humble devotion before something and bowing down. So that does make sometimes the conversations we have about idols just a lot of Christianese talk. Because that's not what somebody is necessarily doing.
Yeah, or they won't want to admit that it's an idol.
Well, that is the second side of it, of where, or we don't necessarily talk about it this way when we talk about us, because we don't know what it looks like to actually bow down before something in a metaphorical sense. But that's a discussion for another time. What we're talking about today
Rabbit trail number 1 avoided
is the good side of worship, which we just said is bowing down, kissing the ground before, and directed towards specifically God. What does that actually look like, though, for the church? And this is where all the arguments start to form and get started. Because depending on what church you go to, you'll have some that say worship is singing.
Mm-hmm.
You'll have some that say worship is not singing. You'll have some that say worship is the 11 o'clock hour. You'll have some that will say worship is only personal. You'll have some that will argue this. You'll have some that say there's no guitars, has to be guitars, smoke,
No drums.
no drums. All the arguments start up. So what worship looks like in the church, we're going to just throw out everybody else and just look at what what the Bible says the church's worship is supposed to look like. So the first thing is psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs. That's out of Ephesians 5 and Colossians 3. Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs means that everybody that's arguing is actually correct. Because you have some that will say you shouldn't sing anything but the Psalms.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Psalms are included, so
Yep.
Good job. You'll have some that say it has to be a hymn without realizing that half the hymns are written,
introduced in songs, mixed in.
They're either they are hymns that were literally psalms to begin with. They're hymns that are only 50, 60, 80 years old. They are hymns that, unfortunately, a lot of them are written by slaveholders and should be thrown out because the theology is horrible. You have ones that are Cold War theology hymns that need thrown out because the theology is horrible. We don't actually define what a hymn is. We just say, well, we should only be singing hymns because it's been approved by whatever publishing company did our
given
hymnal.
it the title of a hymn.
Hymns are included, so good job. Figure out what they mean, though, before you start trying to legalize what is a hymn and what is not. Because most people would be shocked to realize that, well, I'll ask you, the song Awesome God, is that a hymn?
Yes.
It's in the hymnal.
Yes.
Who wrote it?
I could not tell you that.
Rich Mullins.
Okay.
1980. It's only 30, 40 years old here.
Mm-hmm.
And it was written by a guy who the majority of evangelicalism said was a heretic for the first part of his career. But his song is in the hymnal and everybody knows it. But his theology they wouldn't accept. But they'll take his song. Like 50% of the Baptist hymnal that I grew up with, Bill Gaither's name showed up. Bill Gaither is still alive. These hymns are not that old, even though people want to say, oh, well, this is what everybody has always
been passed
sang.
down, yeah.
So to figure out what a hymn is before you try to legalize what is required to be sung within your churches. The other one is spiritual songs. Contemporary Christian worship music would probably classify as a spiritual song.
Mm-hmm.
Basically what we're saying is you guys can stop arguing because Paul already said all of those are okay. We argue about them, though, because of the fact that we think that some of them have more spiritual value than others.
Yeah, we put our priorities in place of other people as well, to the fact that this is my preference or style of worship, and this is how I experience or worship Christ. So you must do the same.
And the big piece of that, besides preference, which we're going to get to in a little bit, is it's about the preference of everybody,
mm-hmm.
right? It's putting my preference above everybody else. And that's because when we're talking about church worship, we're talking about a gathering together. It's a body of believers. It's a fellowship of the saints. This is Hebrews 10, which we're going to get to in more detail here in a little bit. Worship, in terms of what we normally classify it as within the church, involves everybody gathering together. Again, we'll dive into that deeper here in a little bit, because especially in a post-COVID world, this has gotten super complicated when it shouldn't. Just like the hymns, songs, spiritual songs talk. Gathering together has gotten complicated for no reason. Also involved within worship is prayer, which we talked about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, more of the Thanksgiving.
Not even just necessarily Thanksgiving, because going back to 1 Timothy 2, When we read it, Paul gives us how many types of prayers? Do you remember?
Was it 5?
4. There's prayers, petitions, thanksgiving, and
Like reverence?
not reverence,
I'm not sure.
intercession, right? We're praying
Yes.
together. We're praying on behalf of each other. You can't intercede unless you know what is going on, which is why we do it when we gather together. All 4 of those things Paul lists there because he's telling Timothy what types of prayer should show up in service. So obviously, we probably should include all 4 of those types of prayer when we're talking about what worship is. That is all of those things are involved within worship within the church. It's also what we see in Matthew 6 as far as don't just stand up there and do a bunch of big words, actually pray. It's about encouragement. This is throughout all of Paul and Peter and John's letters, and James, kind of. James is a little bit more like, I really don't care if you don't like it, just do it. But encouraging each other, sharing each other's burdens, taking each other's requests to God, intercession.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the fellowship. It's not just about gathering for worship. It's about gathering for each other. That's part of encouragement. That's also just part of relationship and discipleship.
And it could be worship for what God is doing in somebody else's life.
Right. But that only happens if we're together, which that would be part of encouragement also.
Yes.
Or at least it should be, which that's another discussion for another time. See, like we said, we will find multiple other rabbit trails to go off of this one. The other thing that worship involves is the Eucharist, communion, Lord's Supper, whatever you want to call it. That's what we see in 1 Corinthians 11. The Eucharist is supposed to be done when the body is gathered together. That's what Paul says in 1 Corinthians 11 is when you gather, this is what you should do. And it's done, again, for an aspect of fellowship. It's for the aspect of encouragement. It's for the aspect of prayer. It's for the aspect of gathering together. And it actually is an aspect of psalms, hymns, spiritual songs as well. Because we're supposed to be sharing the story together in a way that everybody understands it and remembers it.
Mm-hmm.
The Eucharist is the ultimate example of what church worship is supposed to look like. That is a definition of worship that we're going to work with.
And again, within the church.
Within the church. And there's a reason we keep saying that. Because this is where we start to get some more of the complications involved and why everything starts to get complicated and people like to argue. Worship, in a literal sense, cannot actually be done corporately.
Yes.
It is only done on an individual level. We call it worship when it's done corporately. We have the same sort of settings. We have the same sort of ideas as far as we're all going to God. But worship only can happen on an individual level, no matter how many times the worship leader, we love you, Rev, but we aren't all able to have corporate worship. It is all done individually.
Yes.
Corporate worship, though, is an okay thing to talk about because corporate worship is a gathering of like-minded worshipers gathering together because of the fact that we are gathering together to worship and the Spirit is involved in the process. This is why we see Paul say over and over and over in 1 Corinthians, when you come together.
Mm-hmm.
This is why Jesus tells us in Matthew 18, if 2 or more are gathered in my name, my Spirit will be with them. That's why we worship together, is because if 2 or more are gathered, the Spirit is with us. Hebrews, again, talks about the gathering of the saints. Corporate worship is individual worship multiple times over.
Yeah, and typically as we talk about this in most of our podcasts, one of the things we always highlight is it's about your heart posture.
Right.
Especially on the individual level. And we've shared a little bit too about, between you and I, our different personal styles of worship when we're in corporate, of singing versus
and that's part
processing.
of what we're going to get to. But the bigger thing here is, why is it that everybody always has there's always so much heat behind the conversations about preference? within our churches around worship specifically.
Because it's the easiest thing that we as humans can see and judge, or at least give a temperature gauge to say, all right, this is where Andrew's at with his relationship with God,
Well,
because I can see how he's
that's a
worshiping.
different level that we're going with. I'm going from we're going to give people a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt as far as their intentions here. Worship is individual. Of course, we're going to have preferences on how worship should be done because worship is individual. It's more understandable to see people saying, "Oh, I'm not going to go to this church because they of the style of worship," than normally we give credit to. Doesn't mean it's okay to just leave because you don't like the worship style. Because again, there's things to learn, and we're about to get into the things to learn from other worship styles.
Yeah, and going back to the point of worship is not about you.
It's not about us, it's about God. And so,
yes, but you can still have preferences.
Yes, we can have preferences in the way that we prefer to worship, because worship is done at an individual level. But part of corporate worship is about encouragement and fellowship and allowing the Spirit to move. And if we are actually in worship and it's not about us, then the Spirit moving should be the main preference. Which gets us into the big debates in the Bible around this idea. John 4, which is the story of
Jesus and the Samaritan woman
at the well. And then Hebrews 10, which always comes up in this discussion, but has gotten to be controversial thanks to COVID. And so we're going to look at both of these real quick. And then we're going to give an example of what we were just talking about as far as how individual preferences, when actually done together, are beneficial for everybody. So we're going to start, though, in John 4 to figure out why any of this stuff actually matters. So like we said, John 4, if you don't know what it is, it's the Samaritan woman at the well. Jesus has said, I have to go through Samaria. His disciples are like, we don't get it, but okay. Jesus goes, sits at the well, sends his disciples off into town to go get food. Because like we said, food always needs to be involved if we're doing things the godly way.
Jesus knew.
Exactly. So the disciples are off getting food. Jesus goes and sits down at the well. And a woman comes up. Jesus asks her for a drink, which catches the woman off guard because you've got a Jewish male rabbi talking to a Samaritan woman who is an outcast. And they get to talking. She suddenly realizes, okay, this guy's a prophet after he is able to basically tell her entire life story in a 30-second span of meeting her. And so she asks a question, and that's where we're going to start, is we're going to read verses 19 through 24.
Starting in 19. Sir, the woman replied, I see that you are a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, yet you Jews say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem. Jesus told her, Believe me, woman, an hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, because salvation is from the Jews. But an hour is coming, and now is now here, when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth. Yes, the Father wants such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth.
And the woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, who is called Christ, and when he comes, he will explain everything to us. I am he, Jesus told her, the one speaking to you. I forgot to tell you we were going to 26, so okay. We'll just finish it off that way. So you've got the woman who has suddenly realized this isn't just some random weirdo that's talking to me. This guy has some type of spiritual authority, some type of spiritual insight. I'm going to finally get an answer to the question that's been bugging me. Who actually is doing it correctly? Why does she ask the question, though?
I think, well, first off, she recognizes that Jesus is somebody. Like, he's a rabbi, obviously, with the outcoming of her story. Like, this guy knows some stuff. So I think she feels comfortable asking and genuinely wanting to know, okay, what is the correct style of worship? If I'm going to do this, what's the proper way?
Well, and this is where it gets interesting because, again, this is something we're going to talk about with Rachel once we figure out schedules, as far as the way that women are looked at within the Bible and within the church. Is that if you read a lot of commentaries related to this chapter, everybody calls the woman at the well what? What do they say she is? She's an
Oh,
adulterer,
like
she's
a
a
prostitute. Okay.
prostitute, she's a black widow type of situation, all these different things. That's not what the text says. Nowhere does Jesus ever actually even hint at the idea of you are a sinner because of all of this.
He's just kind of stating facts.
He's not even just saying facts. He's saying, I know you. I know your story. We have empathy. And that is what draws the woman to ask the question. Now, if you look in those same commentaries that accuse this woman of being just some lowly sinner, they say she's trying to justify herself by asking a question that's distracting from all of the sin Jesus just called out. But if we read this story in the way that the text actually says, and look at this as the fact that that Jesus has given this woman a sense of value for the first time, we see what the woman's heart actually is. She wants to know if she actually is worshiping correctly or not. How do I actually do this correctly? Because you guys say we have to go to the temple. Our tradition, our history says we need to stay on this mountain where everything started to begin with. So who actually is doing it right? She has a desire to worship God correctly. And what's Jesus' response?
Basically, that you must worship in spirit and truth.
It's not where, it's not when, it's about how you do it. If you are worshiping in spirit and truth, which that's what this woman is showing, she wants to worship God in a true spiritual form. She just does not know what that looks like because she's been told all these other things. She's been told that drums don't count. She's been told that if there's a guitar, it doesn't count. Or if there's no guitar, it doesn't count. Or if it's a hymn, it doesn't count because hymns are worldly and only psalms matter. Or that if there's a smoke machine, that means that they're woke and so you've got to get rid of them. And she's been told all of these other things. And Jesus tells her that stuff doesn't matter. Worship in spirit and truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because God is spirit. And so you must worship him where he is. Jesus is God that has come to find us in our form. But when we worship, we are to go to him where he is at.
Mm.
And you must do it in truth, which now we're back to the heart matters.
Yeah.
Are you actually doing this because you want to worship God or because everybody around you is doing it?
Yeah, and this will again be another rabbit trail that hopefully we can talk about with Rev. And one of the things I appreciate that he talks about is it's like sometimes when we go to church, we're in that corporate worship, or just even in our own quiet time, we don't feel like worshiping. And by feel like it, I mean when life is not going well, or it doesn't exude this abundance to praise or worship God, there's still that reminding factor, same as kind of like with the Eucharist, where it's that reminder that we can continually go back to of, even though my situation is not what I want it to be or what feels good, but that I can still praise and worship a God who loves me.
And that's why we haven't used the word praise in any of our definitions.
Mm-hmm.
Because worship is not praise. Praise is a type of worship. Worship is not praise. That's why when Paul goes through the 4 types of prayer, the way that it's described as a type of prayer, does not involve praise at all. It's all about reflection and mourning and lamenting and wanting God to do something and remind us again so that we can praise later on.
Mm-hmm.
Worship doesn't necessarily involve praise. Worship involves reminding us where God is at. Again, going back to the stuff we talked about with prayer as well. The whole idea of prayer was your name is holy. Your will be done. It's all on him, not on us. And so when we don't feel like praising, worship is still the correct response.
Mm-hmm.
Because we don't have to be feeling like praising somebody in order to worship. We can be in lament in worship. We can be in mourning in worship. We can be angry in worship. We can be all these different things if we are coming in a place of spirit and truth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the other part of what we see in John 4 goes into the other debate that has come up over the past, well, it's always been up. And I've been dealing with it personally with people for, I don't know how long now, a long
Math.
time now. Yeah, math. It's been on a much more grand scale, especially in the age of social media over the past 5 years or so. We're going to now take what Jesus has said here in John 4 and look at Hebrews chapter 10. Now, Hebrews chapter 10, there's a lot involved. You've got things like the great high priest. You've got things talking about sacrifices and offerings. You've got all these different things. There's one verse in particular that is what gets thrown around and out of context. And so we're going to read more than just that verse so that we can actually look at what this is actually saying. So we're going to read chapter 10, verses 1 through 25 to give us an idea of how we actually take what Jesus just said and apply it to the craziness of what we hear now.
Starting in verse 1, it says, "Since the law has only a shadow of good things to come, and not the actual form of those realities, it can never perfect the worshippers by the same sacrifices they continually offer year after year. Otherwise, wouldn't they have stopped being offered, since the worshippers, once purified, would no longer have any consciousness of sins? But in the sacrifices there is a reminder of sins every year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. Therefore, as he was coming into the world, he said, You did not sacrifice and you did not want sacrifice and offering, but you prepared a body for me. You did not delight in whole burnt offerings and sin offerings. Then I said, See, it is written about me in the volume of the scroll. Have come to you to do your will, God. After he says above, You did not want or delight in sacrifices and offerings, whole burnt offerings and sin offerings, which are offered according to the law. He then says, See, I have come to do your will. He takes away the first to establish the second. By this will of God, we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once and for all. Every priest stands day after day, ministering and offering the same sacrifices time after time, which can never take away sins. But this man, after offering one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down at the right hand of God. He is now waiting until his enemies are made his footstool. For by one offering he has perfected forever those who are sanctified. The Holy Spirit also testifies to us about this. For after he says, This is the covenant I will make with him. After those days, says the Lord, I will put my laws on their hearts and write them on their minds. He adds, I will never again remember their sins and their lawless acts. For when there is forgiveness of sins, there is no longer an offering for sin. Therefore, brothers, since we have boldness to enter the sanctuary through the blood of Jesus, by a new and living way, he has opened for us through the curtain, that is, his flesh. And since we have a great high priest over the house of God, let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience and our bodies washed in pure water. Let us hold on to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who has promised is faithful. Let us be concerned about one another in order to promote love and good works, not staying away from our worship meetings, as some habitually do, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day drawing near.
So, one thing that is not spiritually related at all. The first verse, he's talking about the realities of the world, not the realities of the world, which would be real estate. The realities of the world around us. Sorry, I heard that one. I was like, I can't let that one go. That one's too good. But no, the other side that is not necessarily spiritually related to all this is that this passage is part of the reason why I'm convinced Paul is the writer of Hebrews, because Paul is just consistently writing stuff like this where it is super complicated to try to read, because he uses a lot of run-on sentences that are doing a bunch of historical things and calling back to Old Testament passages that he doesn't cite. He just says, you know that one. It's definitely got to be Paul, because he's the only one that can confuse you but still get the point across at the same time, other than what people accuse us of doing all the time also.
I was going to say, you might fit
As
in
I
that
say,
category.
people tell us all the time. But okay, the verse in particular that gets argued, do you know which one it is?
I'm going to say it's 25. Not staying away from our worship meetings as some habitually do, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day drawing near.
Not neglecting the meeting, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is what gets argued all the time, especially in a post-COVID and a digital world. Is you can't neglect the body, you can't neglect an assembly, you can't neglect the meeting, depending on which translation you want to use. What does it actually mean?
That's a good question. I would say...
Well, let's start with this one. What does everybody say that it means?
They say that you have to be in that body or that community or within a church.
Specifically, when you say that, you mean within a building,
Yes,
right? You have to be
correct.
in the building for that 1 hour with everybody else, or it doesn't count.
Mm-hmm.
And so people use this to say, if your church closed due to COVID, then obviously your church is in sin and cannot ever be redeemed, because you have neglected the body fully for the government. That is not what this verse says at all. They will use this to say, if you work on Sunday, then you need to quit your job because you are now worshiping your job and money instead of God. That is not what this verse is saying at all. They use this to say you can't have online worship because you're neglecting the fellowship. That is not what this verse is saying at all. What does this verse actually say? Looking at it in context of the entire chapter, who actually is, and I'm using this because this is the phrase they use, who actually would be the one in sin with their view of the worship in this case, based off the entirety of this chapter you just read. Because what does Paul start with? He says God no longer delights in what?
Our worship.
Not in our worship, in our sacrifices and in our offerings. He doesn't care about the bulls and the rams anymore. He doesn't care about the idea of you have to be holy before you go behind the curtain. He doesn't care about any of this because Christ has already taken care of all of it.
Yeah.
He is our great high priest who stands before the throne, and because he is there, we can now enter boldly. And everybody agrees with that statement. Because if you don't agree with that statement, then you don't actually understand what the gospel is.
Yes.
Everybody would agree with that statement of the idea of we don't have to do the sacrifices anymore because Christ has already been the sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
That's the basic understanding of the Christian doctrine of salvation. And everybody agrees with that up until we get to verse 25. When suddenly there are requirements in order for you to be actually in worship. Because now it's about being in your specific section of the sanctuary. Because you can't move from your pew. Because if you move from your pew, suddenly the Spirit can't find you, and so it messes everything up.
Yeah, somebody took your seat.
We have to be in the building at the specific time, in the specific place, doing the exact same thing that we've done every other Sunday in order for God to use us. And if you don't do it, then you are in sin and you obviously have an idol in your life. But what's the actual idol that we are seeing shown up in that scenario?
Is it just our own sin?
Worship is the idol. The worship hour is the idol. The sanctuary is the idol. The pews are the idol. Our preference is the idol at that point. Because it's not about who we're worshiping anymore. It's about, am I getting the full experience that I want out of this? What Hebrews 10 actually says is don't neglect the body. Neglecting the body is an intentional action of avoidance. And then Paul adds, because again, I already told you that I'm pretty sure Paul is the only one that writes things this confusing. as some habitually do. This is a habit, not a I can't make it this week because my kids are sick or because I have multiple kids under 5 that are all screaming at the same time. Some habitually do. There's a pattern involved. It's intentional. It's neglecting the spiritual health both personally and corporately. Because if somebody is missing, everybody does suffer. Because, again, when we talk corporate worship, it's the worship of everybody together for encouragement. What does he say here even? It's about
encouraging each other,
doing good works to each other, praying for each other. It's about all of us being able to celebrate together. And so when you are neglecting the body, you are neglecting other people of encouragement and prayer and good works. When you are neglecting the body, you are neglecting your own personal spiritual health of being able to receive the encouragement and the prayers and the good works. That is what the actual issue is being addressed here. So can this be done in an online setting?
Yes.
100%. We see that regularly. Can this be done in the middle of COVID restrictions? That's how we met.
Yes.
Can this be done if occasionally you have to miss a Sunday for work? Absolutely. Can this be done if you just occasionally have to miss a Sunday because of family things? Absolutely, because your family is part of the body. And so if you are needing to care for your family, even if caring for your family is we're just resting today, that is not neglecting the body. That is doing exactly what we are commanded to do, as long as we are not neglecting everybody else around us. And so sometimes what this looks like is churches that have decided, hey, we're going to meet on Saturday night when everybody actually can get together rather than Sunday morning.
And people are like, oh no, you can't do that.
I've heard people actually claim that if you do it Saturday night, you're neglecting the body. Because everybody meets on Sunday, and so it's the idea of the corporate body. And if you meet on Saturday, you're not with everybody else. Ignoring the reality of the fact that it's already Monday in a certain part of the world. You know, when we did our interview with Prudy, he was 10 and a half hours ahead of us.
Still figuring out that half.
We still don't even know how that works because time doesn't make any sense. So the time and the place don't matter because what does Jesus tell us?
That we're supposed to worship in spirit and truth.
Not on this mountain or that mountain or for a certain hour of the day or week or whatever it is. Because again, calendars are not our friend. That is what Hebrews 10 actually addresses. That is what it looks like to have an idea of corporate worship. It's about the body coming together before the throne, regardless of what day of the week that is. So this is part of why, you know, within Third Street, we call them huddles. They're called small groups. They're called Bible studies. They're called whatever you want to call them. Part of the reason why it's encouraged so highly for people to join those types of things is because for some people, that is where the actual idea of corporate worship comes in more than what happens on Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Not going to Bible study may actually be where you are neglecting the body more than you not showing up Sunday morning. Not showing up for a one-on-one discipleship meeting with somebody may be more of a neglecting the body than it is even not showing up on a Sunday morning. We've got these ideas that have been ingrained in us as far as what corporate worship looks like and what it involves. And then we now are in a new era where even that has become politicized. And that's part of why the whole point of what we're doing today is trying to break some of those ideas apart. And the big one, as far as preferences and what that looks like and what it's supposed to look like on a Sunday morning and what everybody's involvement is supposed to look like, is the one that we're going to break apart after this quick break.
We'll be right back.
What's up, everybody? Joe here from Buddy Walk with Jesus. Buddy Walk with Jesus is a show designed to delve deep into the intimate reality of God's present kingdom through raw and honest conversations. And I'd like to invite you guys to join us as we continue on our journey through the book of Matthew. Whether you start from the beginning or jump in at the latest episode, we'd love to have you along for the ride as we seek to unpack the heart of God through the personhood of Jesus. You can find Buddy Walk with Jesus anywhere where you can find podcasts, including our newest home over on YouTube Podcasts. You can also head on over to facebook.com/buddywalkwithjesus. Engage with me over there, as well as our community group at the Buddy Walk community. Remember two very important things: that you are prayed for and you are loved deeply. Peace, y'all.
It's my birthday!
That's right, Misfits. Birthday month is back. Help celebrate the Misfits' birthdays all June by joining Patreon or making a one-time birthday month donation. For the month of June, all Patreon supporters and anyone making a one-time donation of $20 or more through Cash App will receive a Misfits Paul t-shirt as a special thank you. For more information or to find the donations link, go to www.ministrymisfits.com/birthday.
Oh, hello there. My friends call me Brother Matthew. You can too. And I have spent most of my adult life learning history, theology, apologetics, really Christian academia. But recently, I've discovered you can amass all of this knowledge, but not understand God or understand what it means to live out what you believe. If that's you, then follow me on this journey at brothermatthew.net, and we'll discover together how to move from knowledge to understanding, how to have the mind of Christ in the heart of Christ.
We're back.
Hey everybody, we're back. We are still talking worship. We are trying to do it in a somewhat streamlined manner without getting off on too many side
I keep
rails.
seeing if I can move Andrew's
Brandon,
momentum.
this is one of the first times where Brandon is the one trying to completely shift the conversation into another topic.
And Andrew won't allow it.
And I won't allow it this time because we need those other topics to fill out our schedule later on. So we're going to address some of these other things like idol worship. We're going to address some of these other things, like even some of the ideas of like song choices. We're going to address, which we already did that one actually, so we can check that one off the list. You just weren't here for it.
Ding.
Ding. We are going to address some of these other areas of what worship looks like and what praise is compared to worship, all that. We are going to eventually get to it, just not today. Because today we were just defining what it is, which we talked about being a devotion. We talked about being something where it's the idea of actually kissing the ground. We talked about the idea of what it looks like corporately, which is kind of not in real because worship is done individually. But we talked about on a corporate worship level as far as what we see out of Scripture. We talked about the idea of it dealing with some sort of psalms or hymns or songs. The idea of fellowship, of gathering together, praying together, encouraging each other, taking the Eucharist together. I left off baptism. I don't know why I left off baptism, but it was in the part that we read in Hebrews 10. So yes, baptism also is a part of worship. You know, we talked about this back already in the season as far as biblical giving as an act of worship. All of these sort of things are a part of corporate worship. And we call it corporate worship even though worship is an individual action that is done in spirit and truth, which is what we see in John 4.
Yeah.
And then Hebrews 10 shows us why we have corporate worship, because we do have a body that meets together that we should not neglect. All of that is a bunch of theological and just looking at the words and the studies and everything else. And we talked about how controversial, for both good and bad reasons, all of this stuff actually is. And so we want to end today with giving you an example of what actually all of this can look like. Because the assumption from anybody that has grown up in the church at all typically is that, what are you supposed to do on Sunday morning?
You should be singing with your mouth, and well, I don't know how else you'd sing, but that's a whole other episode. Be singing and praising, potentially with your hands up, and even that might be.
Depends on what denomination you're in there.
Yeah, that might be heresy as well.
That one depends on the denomination 100% of the time, as far as what direction the hands go and if they move at all. And that's part of why I've made the joke before, and I found out that it may not actually be a joke. There are some that it may actually be true. That part of the reason that some of the more stricter Baptist and stricter Wesleyan movements refuse to get rid of the hymnals is because if you put the hymnals down, then the hands go up.
Wow.
And so the hymnals
what do I do with my hands?
Right, the hymnals are what keep us from actually lifting our hands. So those sort of ideas.
That is a good debate, because when I'm holding my coffee, I'm like, how do I clap? We need somebody to invent something.
And see, maybe that would be the argument to get coffee houses in more churches, is if you tell them, you're not going to have as many. But then when you have people that do it anyway, the coffee goes flying. So we're still in the problem. But even this right here, as we're just making stupid comments about it, is part of the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because we're saying it tongue-in-cheek. But I've been in business meetings where these conversations come up in a serious manner. Even the idea of, well, we can't have coffee because then it spills on the pews. That can't be part of worship. The idea of, we've got to use the hymnals. We can't use the screens. We can't use this. Everybody needs to be participating in the same manner, as far as everybody should be seen. So we stop everything we're doing and call out somebody when they're not singing. Mm-hmm. Or we tell people they can't be dancing, or they should be dancing, or this, and this. Corporate worship, we already identified what it's for. It's for the encouragement, fellowship of the believers. It's about a gathering together of like-minded people worshiping God together in spirit and in truth. Because when we come together, if there are two or more that come together, the Spirit is with them. That is why it's supposed to be done. But yet we still run into the idea of, well, I worship this way, this person doesn't worship this way. So that means that either that person has a problem, or that means I'm just that much holier.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what Scripture tells us. That's not what anything we just read talks about. Matthew 6 kind of deals with it, because we in the parable that we get out of Luke, when we deal with this idea also that Jesus deals with, the idea of, don't just stand up there making a bunch of big statements and everything like that. Again, spirit and truth.
Yeah.
This came up in a conversation that we had in the Bible study that we were a part of, since we've been disbanded officially now.
Yeah, broken up.
That's a whole nother discussion. We're not for all those that are freaking out, it's not actually breaking up. It's the summertime, and so everybody's taking a short break from each other. But we had this discussion like a year and a half ago about how we actually involve ourselves within corporate worship. You love to sing.
Not well, but yeah.
You're a drummer. You drum in the worship band. I know they mic D-Lou. Do they mic you when you're?
No, they've tried to a couple times.
And then they're like, no, we're not doing this anymore.
One thing at a time. I'm already using my hands and feet. There's no. I'll sing off key behind the cage.
Okay. Hey, spirit and truth, man. Spirit and truth. I, on the other hand, don't find the singing to be helpful at all in terms of my voice.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question was raised by you is, how does this actually work?
Yes. Yeah. Basically what I asked was, how do you experience or have that worship time with God without externally praising?
And this is where we get into spirit and truth. And we get into the idea of the personal side of worship and personal relationships with God. My entire experience with God over the past, however, we already said the numbers are not adding up for us right now, however long it's been, over a decade now, has been, what the name that was given to me was Misfit. Nothing fit, because the theology that I had grown up with was trying to be torn out,
Mm-hmm.
but not in the way that we talk about tearing it out. It was just throw it all away because none of that matters, just buy my book. And so I was trying to deal with that. The athletic side of everything that I was doing was trying to be torn out because of the fact that my knee was literally torn out. And so I was dealing with that because I was literally alone, stuck in a room, unable to get out because the dorm I was in was not ADA accessible. And so most of my reforming, reconstruction, whatever you want to call it, whatever fancy name you want to put on it, years were spent in an isolated state with God. My relationship with God is very much of an isolation type of relationship. Outward seeing isn't going to be helpful at all. That's not how I am able to communicate well with God. However, if you've been in isolation with God for a long time, and then suddenly you are thrown into a place where you are hearing other people praising the same God you are out loud with the same heart, spirit, and truth as you, that's an encouragement.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fellowship.
Yeah.
That's a doing good works to each other.
Mm-hmm.
That's a corporate body of believers coming together. You didn't have the same experience I did.
No.
As far as reforming and restructuring and everything else. This is part of what we've talked about with Brother Matthew. I've had the conversation with the guys over at Bless Up, personally, not on air, the idea of the fact, everybody talks about the fact when you go through reconstruction, deconstruction, you've got to have a faith community around you. Because if you don't, nobody's there to pull you back in. And we say that in a literal sense, because when it actually is happening, it feels like you are drowning. I'm one of the few examples we have of somebody that did have to do it alone, but was able to get back up.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are not like that. Shocker, right? And so what makes sense for me within a worship setting of not necessarily vocalizing anything isn't going to make sense for somebody that hasn't dealt with God in the same manner that I have.
Yeah, and I think going back to, again, our heart posture with everything, we should really just be focused on the connection between ourselves and Christ and not being distracted on, all right, Andrew's not singing over there, so what's he doing? We get so caught up in, I love the series that we've been talking about at church, Distracted. That's literally what we do, is we get distracted on our relationship with Christ, because it should just be about us and him and his
Yes
spirit.
and no. Yes and no. Because people are going to say, well, what I just said as far as what I get out of the worship side,
yes,
is focusing on other people, not on Christ. That's not what we said.
Mm-hmm.
Corporate worship is when 2 or 3 are gathered in whose name?
Christ's
name. Christocentric worship. But for us to be gathered together, we actually have to be together.
Mm-hmm.
We have to even know that we are together. The idea of gathering together is not just everybody's in the same room quietly doing their own thing, unless you're Quaker, but that's a different discussion. Quietly doing because even there, it's not doing your own thing. Everybody is waiting on the Spirit to move together. Are all hearts clear? The phrase that is used to end the service of a prayer service within the Quaker denomination is the idea of all of us have been praying silently, worshiping together, but we have all now come out where all of us feel refreshed, all of us feel encouraged, all of us feel that we have had communion together, whether we've taken of the meal or not.
Yeah.
And all of our hearts are clear.
Mm-hmm.
What we don't want to see is the opposite of that. Because if you are actually so focused on who is or who is not doing something in the service, or what somebody else has on or what somebody else doesn't have on, or, this, did they take their hat off for prayer or not? All of those sort of things, your heart is not clear.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we see, again, going back to Matthew, the Sermon on the Mount, because now I can't remember if it was 6 or 7 or 5, but the idea of what does Jesus say? If you get to the altar and you remember
that there's a grievance against
there's a
you and your
grievance
brother.
against you, or you have a grievance against somebody else, you leave that there and you go make it right before you approach the altar.
Mm-hmm.
Approaching the altar is an individual act, but it's an individual act in a community. And so if you doing this is going to harm the community, you are not doing it in spirit and truth. And so if you have a personal preference related to worship, that's not necessarily a problem.
Yeah.
If you have a personal preference in worship that if it is not done it prevents you from worshiping, that is where it becomes a problem.
Yeah, and I think the other part, going back to all the way at the beginning where we went through the definition of the devotion to, I think it's also important for us to take some time and reflect on what other idols do we have in place of God that we do worship, and what our differences are in those spaces, both in community and in solitude, of how we're worshiping Christ and how we're worshiping those idols, whether it's a sports team, money, our time, the realities, whatever that looks like, to see how our worship is different, but also where our heart is at in those areas.
And what does Paul say in Romans 12 and 1 Corinthians 12? If everybody was an eye, where do we end up? We don't
Nowhere.
know, because all we can do is see in front of us. We can't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. We need the full body.
We've got to have the full body. That's what, 1 Corinthians 11, where we get the idea of the Eucharist from, even though we see it happen with Jesus. Everybody knows that. Jesus is the one that instituted it. But when it actually becomes something where we see it as an act of worship is in 1 Corinthians 11, when Paul says, I receive from the Lord what I am now delivering to you. That you should do this in remembrance of the sacrifice that was done. 1 Corinthians 10, really, through 14, is all dealing with this idea of corporate worship while dealing with individuals. 1 Corinthians 11 is about the Eucharist, where don't come in so hungry that you eat out your guests, where you eat out everybody else, because it's not about you and your hunger. It's about the community around you. If you are that hungry, either eat at home or bring it up to your brothers. That's what community is about. The idea of even head coverings for women, which has been blown up all over the internet recently also. The whole point of what Paul is actually saying here is that if the hair is going to distract because you are coming in jeweled up, the poor person over here can't do anything. It's better that we all come in with our hair covered so that we can worship as a family rather than all hearts not be clear. 1 Corinthians 12, as he walks through the spiritual gifts, He walks through the spiritual gifts so that we are able to understand the fact that everybody has a place here. 1 Corinthians 13 is the fact that it doesn't matter what gift you have because all of us are doing it out of love. Because that is what remains, is the love of Christ. 1 Corinthians 14, when he gets into the big heavy gifts, it's all laid out in a way that it is done so that the body is edified and that Christ is glorified. That is what corporate worship is about, is the taking of a bunch of individual pieces and putting it together so that God is glorified. Not everybody gathering together so that way we can say that we've worshiped now. Because worship is done on an individual level, not on a corporate level. What's done on the individual level has to be done in spirit and truth. What's on the corporate level needs to be done in spirit and truth, but in a manner that helps, not harms. And this is where, as we close out, this is where, one of the other things that I've seen from multiple different areas is when we start talking about things like church abuse and church hurts related to Hebrews 10. Because Hebrews 10 says not to neglect the body, not to neglect the assembly, make sure that you are a part of the body. But what happens when the body is what has neglected you? This is why it's important for us to understand that it's not about the building or the time of the week or anything else. If you have been neglected by the body, you are not the one in violation of Hebrews 10 here, first of all. The body neglecting you is a completely different thing than you intentionally not attending just because you don't want to be there.
Yeah.
Working through your trauma is an act of worship if it's done in spirit and truth. Because if you are trying to be reconciled back to yourself, you have to do that in a manner of finding yourself, which, if you are a believer, finding yourself means finding your identity in Christ. That's Christocentric living. Working your way through the trauma is an act of worship when it's done in spirit and truth. There are bodies of believers that are there to come alongside you and not neglect you in spirit and truth, even if that's only done in meetings online in a chat room somewhere. You can have worship in that manner because we already said it's not about the place, it's not about the building, it's not about what songs you're singing or if there's the smoke machine or not. It's about a gathering and a fellowship of like-minded believers, because when 2 or 3 are gathered, the Spirit is there with them. That is what worship actually looks like. So we don't know what next week is going to be.
Except for July 4th.
We don't know what anything is going to be, really. But next week especially, we don't know what's going to be happening. So let us know what you think here. Let us know if anything we said made things even more complicated. And if it did, blame the writer of Hebrews, because that passage gets very, very wordy very quickly. Let us know what you think. You can do that in a bunch of the different ways. All the social media channels, we're at Ministry Misfit on there. You can do it on the website. There's the contact us form on there. Birthday month is coming to a close.
Yep.
So hurry up.
Make your donation. Get the Misfit Paul t-shirt.
Yes, hurry up. Get in there. Patreon.com/Ministry Misfits. If you join Patreon before the end of the month, then you'll get a Misfit Paul t-shirt in addition to the Patreon goodies. If you go to ministrymisfits.com/birthday, you can get the Cash App link. A $20 or more donation there will get you a Misfits Paul t-shirt also. All the good stuff. Fantasy football is coming up.
That's weird to think, too.
I know. That's it. We're going to hopefully get things planned out a little bit more in advance, even more this year than we did last year. We did much better last year in planning it in advance.
Yeah. But people didn't like the
But we had some complaints about how many people, mainly from the people that thought they were going to be able to easily come in and clean up in the league because they were playing with people that had never done it before. And then they got embarrassed when
when every quarterback got hurt.
Yeah, when every quarterback was hurt within the first week. So fantasy football is coming up. Again, you can check out the website. We'll have information as far as when we're ready to start taking signups and things like that and how much. And we've had requests for 2 separate leagues this year so that the people that were whining about the inexperienced players beating them because of injuries, they won't have to deal with the shame next year. So stay tuned for all of that. It'll be hopefully we'll have some more information here before August. As July goes through, we should be nailing some more things down, different things like that. Again, birthday month coming to a close, so hurry up with that if you want to join us for the fun with birthday month. You can still join Patreon after that. Just know the Misfit Paul deal goes away. So hurry up with that. If you want a Misfits Paul t-shirt anyway, though,
Order it on.
merch shop is open. You can also get some of the Tikva gear there as well. And hopefully we're also going to be able to do some Tikva fun with everybody here in the next month or so as well. So in the meantime, we will see you all next week.
The Ministry Misfits podcast is a production of Ministry Misfit Media in association with Overwhelming Victory. Dr. Greg Linville and Andrew Fouts are our executive producers, and Brandon Simmons is associate producer. The Ministry Misfits theme song is written and produced by J.D. Laird and Laird Creative Agency. If you would like to get in touch with us, you can email us at ministrymisfitmedia@gmail.com or by following @ministrymisfit on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. You can also visit our website at www.ministrymisfits.com or through bio.link/ministrymisfits. If you would like to support Ministry Misfits, you can become a patron by going to patreon.com/ministrymisfits.